So welcome everybody to our panel today. It's very exciting. I'm looking forward to listening and learning more about everybody's career paths. And I would like to just start it at first with a land acknowledgement. So I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And we are very fortunate to be in a space where we can see evidence of how an arts community is a thriving community. And we have had so many events this past year to understand the importance of continuously learning from people of different cultures and how each of us in our work and in our arts look at things differently or similarly in relation to place and to each other. And we are fortunate to be in a city that invests in placemaking, creating environments that people want to live, work, play, and learn. And this makes me think of looking at the Bentway and the community art practices happening in that organization, or I recently saw a show called The Mush Hole by Kahali Dance Theater, and it was a fantastic performance speaking about the truths of Canada's first Indian residential school, the Mohawk Institute. So to be able to see all these kinds of works and to also be here today to listen to this very special panel and to hear the career paths of our guests are all part of making sure these stories are told. So I just ask that as we get busier, we just take time to stop, to listen, and I appreciate how everyone is here today. So I will now pass it on to Samantha.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Again, welcome to Black Success in the Spotlight, Art, Media, and Identity. My name is Samantha Graham, and I am a student engagement assistant for the Arts, Culture, and Media Department at UTSC. I have been basically doing behind the scenes research, including handpicking our moderator and our panelists to make this event a reality. I understand the gaps that Black people in general face within arts. It's also across the board, it's quite broad, but I wanted to focus something that's not so much under my forte. For instance, I'm in biochemistry, but I found it really interesting that a department such as ACM, having a smaller Black community, it definitely needs to have more of an identity and they need to feel that kind of belonging. So that's why I'm here today. I would also like to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to attend today's event. I know we are all busy. So getting into today, we will embark on an enriching journey celebrating the intersection of creativity, individuality, and identity within the Black community. To guide us through this insightful discourse, we are honored to present our esteemed moderator, Garvia Bailey, and distinguished panelists, Lillian O'Brien Davis, Alika Hall, and Cameron Grant. I will begin by introducing our moderator. Garvia Bailey is a co-founder of Media Girlfriends, Inc. Garvia's career in media spans close to 2 decades as a producer, host, a columnist for the CBC and Jazz FM. Garvia is also a 2023-2024 William Southam Journalism Fellow at the University of Toronto's Massey College, where her work will center on shifting attitudes towards the use of personal narrative in journalism. As you introduce our panelists, can you reflect on the significant moments that have shaped your career, especially navigating the media landscape as a Black woman? We'd all love to hear it.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Those are great jumping off questions. And thank you for your kindness in inviting me here. I feel very honored to be a part of this panel today. I am personally so passionate about the arts and the power of the arts. If you've read any James Baldwin and his Price of the Ticket essays about the role of the artist, especially in times like we are in now, times where you're trying to make sense of the world, I think art has a way of doing that that you can't read on Twitter or TikTok or, IG. Like the arts gets to the heart of the matters at hand. So for me specifically, I landed at the CBC and became the go-to person for covering any art that was non-white. And I didn't know that that's what my role was. I thought I was just an arts journalist. But in during that tenure, I was told specifically at one point when I dared to do some white-centered arts coverage, I was called into a manager's office and told, that's not your role. That's not what we invited you, or that's not why we asked you to come on. We want you to be the person that covers anything non-white. To me, that was just a really crystallizing moment in terms of how narrow people can view you as a racialized journalist. And I realized that it was my responsibility. And at the same time, I realized that it was my responsibility to not cover racialized folks as just a big blob of this is a box that needs to be checked for my bosses. I needed to highlight excellence, the fact that there is Black excellence, that there is that we don't just exist, but there is excellence out there. So that was, I think I covered NIA way back in the day when it was like in the very, very early days. I then moved on to Jazz FM, where I worked very hard to wrestle the story of jazz back from a Eurocentric lens, back to its roots as social music, nurtured, conceived of, championed through the lens of the Black experience. It's music that made its way out of struggle and into joy. And I wanted to, at Jazz FM, really wrestle that story back. I left there and started Jazzcast, where I had more time to do that. And now, as a journalist, I amplify the voices of those who sometimes get left behind with my company, Media Girlfriends. So it has been a struggle. But it has also been really wonderful to be someone as a journalist, being able to amplify those voices that I think are being missed out. And I think this Black Success in the Spotlight, Art, Media, and Identity, what a juicy title. I feel like I'm made to have this conversation with these wonderful folks. So today you're going to get a chance to ask our panelists some questions after we dig into that very juicy title for a little while. So if you are in the audience or you're thinking about it right now, so jot down any questions you may have, because at the end of all of this, we're going to ask your questions. But for now, I want each individual panelist, they're going to get a chance to be in the spotlight, to talk about their work, put out some roadmaps or signposts for us as we think about approaching equity, diversity, inclusion in the many spaces that are inhabited, that we are inhabiting, that they are inhabiting as creators. So our panelists, I want to tell you just a little bit about them, and then we're just going to dive in with a small question to get us started. So of course we have Cameron Grant. He is an actor, educator, and arts educator from classical stage theater, the Shaw, Stratford. Shout out to Stratford. I'm a Stratford girl, by the way, and I would love to see your face in Stratford if you come through, please. We need more Black folks just walking around Stratford. Just saying. Anyway, your work is extensive, from the stage to the screen to film. Has been working in the theater space for over a decade. Alika Hall is at the NIA Center for the Arts, Canada's first Afro-diasporic arts facility, serving and supporting Black artists and creatives. Nia has been a long time in the making, and now it's here, and it is very exciting, I have to say. Lillian O'Brien Davis is the newly minted curator at the Art Gallery of York University. We have so much to talk about around museum and art spaces and what is going on in those spaces and the work that you're doing there. So thank you all for being here. I want to open up the floor with just a question that is a big question, but I'm sure that you all can answer it, because I sort of shared my moment when identity and the work I was doing came together, and I realized that it was something that I had to wrestle with within myself as I did the work I was doing. So I'm wondering with each of you, that moment, or if you can pinpoint a moment before you got into the positions that you're in now, when you realized that your identity was going to be something um, that you had to address as you push forward in your career, or how you wanted those two things to intersect, the excellence of work you were doing and your identity. I'll start with you, Alika.
Okay. I think I actually have like a really unique experience in that my first role sort of coming out of university was at a Black-led organization called the Youth Challenge Fund. And so I was an intern there, and the fund was really set up after a spate of gun violence in the city. And, for the first time, the province and the city of Toronto and United Way Toronto came together and were like, okay, we're going to invest significant funding into Toronto's inner suburbs. And so this $45 million fund was set up, and that was all staffed by sort of young Black professionals who were interested in working in the areas of community development. And I, having run a girls group in Jane and Finch when I went to York University, that was supported through the Youth Challenge Fund, got to apply for the position and become an intern there. And it was, of course I had done community work, for a couple of years at that point, but it was the first time now that I understood how my lived experiences as a young Black woman would now be informing like how we figured out how to fund strategies, how to engage young people, how to write materials that would be relevant to them. Like it wasn't about me, adopting this, professional sort of notion of writing or bringing in an academic lens, but I actually had to break out of that and figure out, oh, okay, actually, no, they want me to bring Alika's perspective to the table, as Alika has, grown up in Scarborough and also grown up in Brampton, and understand, what her experiences are that, help inform, the strategies that they develop to invest in funds and engage young people. And so I think that was a really unique privilege for me, but it was also really eye-opening because everyone around the table had such varied experiences, right? And so while I understood that the Black experience was diverse, just seeing the nuances of how that actually showed up in terms of how people, the perspectives that they brought, what they thought was critically important based on them being Muslim, or, having grown up in specific inner suburban neighborhoods, or, them having been involved or in conflict with the law. Like everyone just had such unique and varied perspectives, and all of that really enriched what we were able to do in terms of like strategy and investment, because people brought those voices to the table and their lived experience to the table. So I feel really grateful that I got to start my career from that place.
Yeah, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that when you are in the spotlight yet again, and talk about that work. Lillian, what about you? Like, was there a moment in which you were like, me as a Black woman, I am going to have to tackle some things moving into this space?
Yeah, listening to you, Alika, I'm envious because I was like, oh, my story isn't as like empowering and it's sort of like it's a weirder note, but I think in my sector, working kind of in the arts, my background's in art history, I was often like an only, in my courses and my classes, and so I've been conscientious of that for a really long time, and I think yeah, we're all nodding like we've all been there, and I'm sure some of the people tuning in can relate as well. And so there was a moment when I was doing my master's, where there was an invited speaker, and I won't say their name, but I did publish a piece of writing, so their name is in that article if you're curious. And they did this talk, and I was really like disturbed by the talk, the way that they were handling the content and the material. They were talking about the civil rights movement in the United States, and the kind of like clinical, very removed perspective that they were taking to describe the images that they were showing, and they were really difficult images to look at. And it was like me looking around the audience and saying, like, no one, I don't think anyone's seeing this, or like I'm the only one who's having this reaction as far as I can tell right now. And so I ended up going home and writing about it just for myself. And then I shared it with a mentor that I had a few years later, named Jazz Morgan. And they were really supportive. They were like, you need to submit this. Like, this should be published. It's a piece of criticism. And so they took it to Canadian Art when I was around, for me, and advocated for me and had the piece published. And it had a great reaction and response. And it was also because of the timing. It was published in the summer of 2021, I believe. So people were in lockdown, people were advocating, they were having really difficult conversations. So I think the piece also was published at a moment when people were really looking to have that information and have those conversations together. But for me, that was sort of like the galvanizing moment was looking around that auditorium and being like, well, I need to process this, and there's no one who can do it for me or with me at the moment. And so like it was important for me to figure out a way to do that. And then also a lesson was learned in that by doing that, I sort of found more people, and through connecting with Jazz, who's Indigenous, and other people who've sort of helped me along the way, it's also taught me how much collaboration is so important to my practice, and I really have learned to value it from these experiences. So out of a somewhat negative or upsetting experience came this this energy that sort of propelled me the last 5.5, 6 years. So I can't say that I'm grateful, because I'd love not to have to sit through another panel or talk like that ever again, but I recognize what it did, and how I was able to process it.
Yeah. You bring up something that is so incredibly important to, I think, recognize. And that 2021 moment that we were all in together was so difficult, but at the same time, so freeing. So a paper like that, you might think that maybe, 3 years prior to that, it might have been hard to write it and then publish it. It would have been easy to write, hard to think about publishing. I think there was a freeing up moment that was happening there. And we can talk about that, what it feels to be freed up and then to be pulled back. I want to talk to you, Cameron, about that moment for you when you were like, my identity and the work that I'm doing, how do they talk to each other, and the importance of that? Was there a crystallizing moment for you?
Yeah, I so relate to Lillian's sort of experience as well, and it was a difficult one. Where it was a moment where it was sort of thrown back at me, my blackness, and I feel lucky though that it happened while I was in my formative training years of becoming an actor, and in my undergrad doing theater school training. But I remember being in a scene study class. I was the only Black person in my class and the only person of color in the class that graduated. And we were doing a scene from an Ibsen play, sort of written in the 1800s, typically cast with all white people. And I had just finished our final go at the scene. So part of the scene study class is you do the scene 3 times over several weeks, and every time you kind of get feedback and then have a opportunity to reapply it. And hopefully by the third one, which is your final pass, it's your final offering. So you've hopefully done the work and made it there. And I nailed it. I nailed the scene. I felt it. I felt great. I felt it with my scene partner, and we got some great feedback. And then my professor said, "Too bad you'll never play this part, and you'll never be right for it because I'm black." And it was an ice pick going into my stomach, because I was like, "What? I don't understand." Like I couldn't understand that moment, and it took me 3 steps back before it brought me forward. And I
Mhm.
remember I was lucky to just have another professor later in my training who said, who kind of woke me up and kind of shook me one time, not physically, but really sort of with his words, and said, "You're black, and I know you're the only one in this program, but that's a superpower for you." And I think that moment, that initial moment, made me want to hide as if I could. And um, and this professor sort of saw that in me, and realized that he just needed to sort of turn that off. And from that moment, I was like, "Oh no, I'm black. What I've been trying to hide this whole time." And so I really made use of that in the last year I had in school, and I realized I was about to graduate not knowing any Canadian Black playwrights. And there were no courses to teach me. So I created my own independent study, and started gaining that information, and reaching out to Black theater artists in Toronto. And then, in a kind of full circle moment, I spent the first 4 years of my career at the Shaw Festival, uh, a classical theater company, typically past plays from the 1800s to the sort of mid 1900s, typically and traditionally plays written by white people, cast with white people, playing roles for a lot of the times, the first times on those stage, um, with a Black person in that role, and bringing that identity to the role, and trying to be unapologetic about that. Sometimes with various levels of success, but always from that moment realizing or knowing that there's never hiding my skin color in when I'm on stage. And so that comes to every production, that comes to every role I take on. Yeah.
Let's keep rolling, Cameron. Like, let's give you the spotlight for a little while to talk about that, because what I'm thinking about in the story that you just shared is the individual that said that to you, Cameron, you're never going to have that role. They are working within a system that has sort of set up the parameters of what faces should be in what roles. And coming from Stratford, I've moderating panels in Stratford and talked to the artistic director there many times about the idea of the systems that need to be broken down in theater. And my first question to you is really about the curriculums, that because people are being taught these things.
Yeah.
This is a system that, it's an educational system. So I want to know about those systemic gaps around education, for example, in EDI, in those theater spaces. What is not being addressed? How is that shift? Like, are you seeing a shift in the way people
Yeah.
are coming out of education and theater?
I I I am seeing a shift, but not necessarily a shift yet in the curriculum, and in what's being taught, the courses that are being offered. And I think the hardest thing is within theater, and I mostly work in theater. uh, the training institutions that we have for you to become go through a classical training program, and be ready for the stage like Stratford or Shaw, or any professional stage in Canada, are mostly at universities or colleges. And so the courses that are offered, the way that those programs are structured, are centered around a very classical, right-centric, Eurocentric way of teaching. And that this resources, the samples we have, the scenes, the plays, the professors that we have available to teach this content, center around whiteness. And so,
Mhm.
like, even as I mentioned, I sort of created that independent study because I got to my fourth year and I realized in my Canadian theater history class and my contemporary theater history class, I had only read two plays by Black people, and only one of them was Canadian. And I was like, I don't
Mm.
know any Canadian Black playwrights, and I'm at my fourth year. I look at my classmates, and they know all of the hot white Canadian playwrights, contemporary and classic. They have a whole body of classical work that speaks to them. And so, and even, looking for somebody to guide me through that, there wasn't anyone Black or of color that was on staff that was a tenured professor that could lead me through that course. So it had to be, and my instructor was great, but even that connection was missed. And so those are the things that take slower to change, right? Because how do we get people into tenure positions? How do we uh, advocate for larger systemic changes to the actual curriculum, which needs to be approved by senates, which need to go through huge processes within the university? And so there are minor changes and nimble changes being made, but not on a level that's going to allow it. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's going to take much longer than I think we want to, unless those bureaucratic systems change. Unless we just say, no, we need to have this course and we need to find someone to teach it, and we need to re-evaluate who we think is qualified to teach that course. Because then otherwise, yeah, if you go the other direction, I could have taken that moment and dropped out. We started my first year class
Absolutely.
with four. It was one of the most diverse classes the program I'd ever had, and by the time we got to second year, it had become one of the least. And so
Right.
where all those people went, some of them came back, but like it was a moment for me where I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this, because if I can't, nobody can see me in the classical work, then there wasn't a whole lot of work happening at the time that was um, by Black playwrights. I was like, oh, this is going to be a difficult path. And it has been in some ways, and things have shifted, I think, on the other side of the industry. There is that sort of need and want now, and certainly after 2020, 2021, a reinvigoration in that. But it's a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is a journey. And, you've been at this for, like I said, it's been a decade. And I'm reading something in the chat right now, and someone has said, I'm in my fifth year, about to graduate, and I have only read one play by a Black playwright. This is in the year of our Lord 2024. Like, what are you saying to me right now? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, and these are these institutions of higher learning. And I just feel like where does it start? Like, you talk about the all of the levels, like it has to go through Senate and this has to happen. But I feel like that change can be started at a micro level. Like, I think that, because having been an educator in university settings, I know that we set the syllabus.
Yeah.
So I just wonder what is being missed in these conversations around equity, diversity, and inclusion, that those that are educating, they're missing something. Like, something is missing.
Yeah. So, and I think who's in the room is sometimes
Yes.
is missing. And then I also think there's a bit of from what I've perceived, and I sit on a lot of advisory councils and offer suggestions and to the program that I graduated from as well. But I think there's also a bit of a fear of like, oh, I can't teach this content. I don't know this content. I have to catch myself up on it, and now I have to teach it. And there is this paralyzing sort of fear or paralyzing sort of moment where people feel as if they're inadequate. And instead of investigating that, instead of saying, look, this needs to happen, and I'm the one who's here to teach it, so let's all go on this journey together and figure it out, and bring the same level of dedication and rigor that they would bring to Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because that rigor and dedication is no different. And these people were smart. They've got PhDs, masters, whether trained, they have experience. So I trust you to bring all of that, of what you know, all of your experience and diligence to the work. But you do have to do it, right? And the fear can't hold you back from doing it, even if there's distance. As I've had to do it, learning, becoming familiar, and getting comfortable with the white playwrights I typically do plays of. So.
Absolutely. That's exactly the point, I think. I think that you nailed it right there in, like, you have to walk outside of your identity to find your place here. Why is no one else having to live up to do the same thing? We're talking about the fulsomeness of theater, not the specifics of, one presentation of what theater looks like or feels like. I have one more question for you about the larger institutions that you've worked with. I'm talking about, Shaw was founded in 1962. Stratford was founded 10 years earlier than that, in 52. When we look at these older institutions, I know that the conversations have been happening around things like a broader representation of the plays that are being shown, but also, kind of race-free casting, like casting whoever, wherever, the best actor for the job. What kind of leadership would you like to see from these institutional heavyweights in terms of affecting the change that you want to see? Like, because I think that these leaders could affect what is happening in university settings, in what's happening in education. What would you like to see from the leaders of Shaw and of Stratford and of those bigger companies?
I'm a little conflicted about it. It's a great question. I'm conflicted by it because sometimes I think I don't have that expectation of them because of how deeply they are entrenched um in some ways, having worked at both institutions and for the longer at Shaw, they're their own. They've sort of themselves out of the theater community because of how large they are and because of how institutionally entrenched they are. And so they can in some ways operate outside of the conversation in a way, and still keep going, without, on the surface, without money running up or funding drying up. And so that's one side of it. But I think I do look to them too, and I think a lot of people look to them because they have the bigger budgets, they have the larger cast, they hire the most amount of people, they are the most lucrative contracts in these are two of the biggest theater companies in North America. And if you're working there 9 months, that's a very lucrative, and not just financially, but as an artist, to stay in a play for 9 to 12 months is really incredible and unique in Canada outside of commercial theater. So they do have this large responsibility, and I think they're both grappling with what that looks like, and I think they both open their doors to more diversity within their plays. I think what I continue to ask of them is that, how does the casting change the story when we allow it to, right? And so if we are if we are going to cast it diversely, if we are going to put a Black person in the role of Juliet, as is going to happen next year, how does that shift the story? And can we let it? Can we engage with that shift? Can we cast the story around that shift, so that when we're looking at the stage, it's clear, it makes sense that it's not a Black Juliet, an Asian lady, a lady Capulet, a white Capulet, and then you're like, wait a sec, who's the mom, who's the dad, who's the kid? Like, can we cast a can we use casting to be cohesive, to tell a story, and then see what that story unveils within this classical play, right? And I think that's the gap that sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't. That I would love to see those companies take a little bit more of a step forward in, because I think it opens up something really exciting when you do.
I love it. Thank you so much, Cameron.
Yeah.
Who's doing the Black Juliet? Is that Shaw or Stratford or where?
Stratford's doing Romeo and Juliet, yeah, and Vanessa
Yeah,
Sears.
Stratford, high five, Stratford. I love it. I will see you in the theater. I think the other way to support all of that is by just going to the theater and supporting these productions. Anyway, we'll talk about that. Alika, we need to talk about the NIA Center for the Arts, which is such a profound achievement. This journey from conception to now, a $12 million Black Arts Center. What? It is kind of mind-blowing. You spoke about your time at the Youth Challenge Fund and how that vision evolved over the years to where you are now, culminating in being a part of the NIA Center as a hub for Black artists and creatives. I want to talk a little bit about that journey and how you found yourself from here to there, and some of those things that you might have overcome, or what pushed you forward towards being here in this time.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is a really unique journey. I really feel quite honored to be part of NIA Center's sort of, being around the early days and the early tables and ideation all the way to actually seeing it through. So NIA Center was born out of the Youth Challenge Fund. So there was, about 4 rounds of funding that were focused on what would be called legacy projects. So projects that should live beyond the lifespan of the fund, since it was like a temporary fund that was set up. And so one of the areas that we had identified that we wanted to create impact, because all of the projects were meant to be create impact in different areas where Black people face marginalization. And so one of the areas was the arts. And so the team at the time gathered a group of artists to sort of think through what it would look like to have a Black Arts Center in the city. And so there were, folks around the table like, Dibby Young, amazing playwright, Wayne Mangesha, who's the artistic director of Soul Pepper, Amanda Paris, author, titles.
Yeah.
Ian Kamau, Dr. Mark Campbell, who's also a professor at UTSC. So really amazing, artists and creatives in their own right came together and sort of thought about what it would look like to have this Black Arts Center. And I was just an intern. Like, I was a fly on the wall. I was, writing minutes that day. I still have the notebook. But just it was a really amazing experience to be able to see these different projects in different sectors get off the ground, and, young Black professionals leading them in their communities, and, all of a sudden they were tasked with realizing these projects, and, for probably the first time had some resources to be able to do it. And it was a great learning experience for me to witness all of that. And coming from running, my own girls group, that was like, now I had just leaped into, oh, okay, organizationally, what does it mean to actually start, a whole organization? So witnessing that was a really useful part of my career and development, and really helped me to also see the importance of building your own network as peers, right? Because there was a lot of young leaders at the time, and that's what a lot of I think people say, looking back now at YCF's impact, the impact wasn't about the new infrastructure created or the money that was dispersed, but it was an investment in the leadership of all of these young Black professionals who had the opportunity to start things, to mess up, to fail, to be successful, to test ideas, to bring, new initiatives that they had been dreamed about in our community for many years, but hadn't actually had the resources to be realized. And they had an opportunity to test that out. And so that gave them just such great opportunities and experience from the act of doing, right? And I often say that, in my work, I feel like I've been actually doing the same thing since I was in university. I was very involved in student organizing. I was very involved in, Black leadership on campus, on queer leadership on campus, and all about bringing people together. I was about, supporting political education. There was a Caribbean Students Association and a Somali Students Association and a, every kind of student association. But my job was really okay, how could we all come together as folks of the Afro diaspora and, talk about, the lack of Black education on campus, talk about the lack of safe spaces for Black students on campus. And so really, I feel like now I'm doing the same thing, but in a different vein. And so I think, for me, what's been critical in my journey is that community building and that ability to create, a network of peers who you can work with, recognizing that you're not always going to get the kind of support that you need. You're not going to always have the mentorship that you need, or, people are not going to fling open doors for you. But being able to understand, and be able to have a space to collaborate and vent and, understand who might have done something similar to you or been in a similar situation is such an important part when the going gets tough. And the going gets tough when you're doing whatever. Life is challenging, right? So yeah, I went from, being an intern and then like lots of other things in between. I worked in communications and marketing and issues management and, led Pride Toronto for a number of years as the co-chair there. But I ultimately came back to the center at a time where it was going through a really difficult moment in the capital project. Projects are expensive. They, take a lot of resources, and as nonprofits, you don't always have the resources to be able to, address issues. And so I came at a time when the organization was in a deficit and owed a lot of, money, and the capital project had started and stopped. And, the work was really to get it back on track and, take it from what was the idea of a $1 million renovation, which would become a $12 million renovation in 3 floors. So lots of difficult and challenging times, but I think at the core of the work and what, gets me out of bed every day is this ability to create communities, to bring people together, is to create infrastructure for people to connect and be able to know that there is someone else who has a similar dream as them or can support them in their dream. Often for creatives and artists, they're isolated in their work. And so really being able to create a space where people feel that sense of confidence and affirmation, knowing that Black artistic traditions aren't always supported, as we've talked about, it is an important, I think, addition of resilience in our community to create that sense of belonging and that sense of affirmation and having a space to be able to do so. And so that gets me up before the clock every day.
Love it. I wonder, you touched on this just slightly. You just kind of skirted over it. It's kind of the challenges, because we talked about, that money, that number gets bandied about a lot. A $12 million Black arts set. As soon as you start putting dollar signs behind any kind of initiative that has Black attached to it, there comes into the conversation the politics of it all and the pushback and those challenges that might not come to someone that is just putting together a youth center. No Black, just a youth center. You know what I'm saying? So I just wonder about the politics at play in creating a center like this, and how those politics feed into your daily workings at NIA.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is in raising the funds, right? Organizations like ours are usually working on a capital project for a long time, but they usually have a lot of donors already around the table. We talked about, some storied institutions, in this province, and those folks have thousands of people who just give every year to their organization, right? But we know that for Black charitable organizations like ours, I think it's 7 cents on every charitable dollar is donated towards them. So that means that for Canadians who are, handing out donations every year, and, as part of their, giving back, philanthropy, they just give 7 cents on every dollar that they donate to a Black charity. So there's a huge disparity in how Black organizations, arts organizations, get and receive funding at, sort of the individual donor level. Then at the government level, you have the additional consideration of, we're supporting Black artistic traditions, but those artistic traditions haven't been seen as, valuable and worthy of investment by a range of institutions, right? So hip hop is not seen as a valuable art tradition or form of dance. jazz is, seen as this, amazing, high class, exercise. But like at the end of the day, that music is born out of our community and it's only become respected when white performers have, taken it to a certain stage or level, right? And, hip hop, despite its, ways in which that it's put Toronto on the map, Canada on the map, we can ream up all the Canadian amazing hip hop artists, but least funded genre, a number of our institutions. So we're not investing in Black art forms. We don't value Black art forms. And so why would we need a Black Art Center? Right.
Mm-hmm.
You have two kinds of, two forms of revenue, essentially, that are harder for us to get because there's it's seen as not having the same kind of value. I remember I did a pitch to, a financial institution, and the woman on the call was like, so what are you going to do? Like, looked at the deck and was like, so like, what art are you going to produce? I don't get it. Like, is it like hip hop shows? There's not a single hip hop reference in that deck. That deck did not have a rapper, did not even have a music, scene with a stage. But like immediately, it's just like I don't know any Black artists of note of worth. So what would I even be funding? So you're up against this perception that the art from your community doesn't have value. And so that becomes, a real challenge when you're trying to raise funds because people are not coming to the table with any, initial kind of interest in the art form. It's not like, opera where they're gonna, oh, I'm gonna bring my clients to your shows. So you have to already even get over this hump of, well, do you actually see value? I have to justify the art form before I can even ask you for the resources to support the art form. So I think that's like an ongoing sort of lens and challenge that we face in raising funds, to both create the center and then sustain the center, is we don't have necessarily, a philanthropic community that's built in or that is, champion our art forms because they haven't necessarily grown up with them, right? A lot of these forms in this presence of their existence in Canada are newer for audiences and donors. And so there's inherent bias against it. And so that's I would say one of the sort of ongoing challenges that we have in being able to support and resource our work.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I love the fact that there is a community that is supporting of established art, like people like Wenyi Mengesha, who every board meeting is fighting the fight for the NIAs and for the theaters and for the Wedge Gallery or for band or for, for all of every step that she takes forward into that space is in the hopes that 7% grows, even though Soul Pepper is not specifically a Black theater company, by virtue of being led by a Black woman and the choices being made, you end up with this representation. And I want to make sure that we have time to talk about the pressure of that representation with all three of you. But for right now, I want to talk to you, Lillian, about museums and art galleries. They have not been immune from the scrutiny when it comes to matters of decolonization. And I know you're new to this role at the Art Gallery of York University, but I want to talk about how your identity influenced or has influenced your approach to curating exhibitions and engaging with artists and audiences, especially within these white spaces, with the thought of decolonization kind of buzzing around. Like, it's a big lift for a curator.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big question and it's a big responsibility and it's one that I've never shied away from. And I think one of the ways that I've tried to, recognize the way that my identity can help shape or help influence the work that the exhibitions or the artists that we're engaging with. And you know, I'm new at the AGYU, and it's a new context, but through many of my roles has been to focus on relationships. And I say that in the sense that I have observed generally that there's often like an interest in saying like, oh, we should find a Black artist and we'll invite them to do something. Like there's this sort of vagueness of like, oh, you just get anyone and they'll do something. And you know, that's great, you know, someone's getting paid, but it's sort of it I think it lets Black artists down in the sense that it's non-specific. So you're not looking at their skills or what they're thinking about or what they're creating. You're just trying to check a box. And so I've been trying my best in my curatorial practice to be a lot more invested in like relationship building and actually connecting and saying, oh, this particular artist is working on this. I think this is relevant to the work we're doing here. Let's reach out to them, see what they think, and like build that relationship. And often I'll work with artists for more than once over a number of years because the relationship grows and there's mutual trust, and it creates an environment where like better work is done because we're both sort of like understanding one another and responding to each other and growing. And so, you know, there's artists that I've worked with across all the organizations that I've been at over the years. And it's great because of that trust. And I think it's an impact that I've tried to, a legacy that I've tried to leave too when I move on from an institution, to know that, you know, okay, there's a little bit more of reflection and planning that goes into this, and it goes beyond just the month of February, like when we're bringing these artists and these individuals into the community. And that's a lesson I learned in real time, especially because I lived in the prairies for a few years. Right out of grad school, I moved out there, and so leaving a city like Toronto and moving to a really small center like Regina, like there is a Black community there. They're not that connected to the main galleries in Mackenzie. That's a burgeoning relationship over the last couple of years that's changing. But at the time when I arrived, there wasn't a lot of presence, and so there was a lot of goodwill. Like there was a lot of interest. Like, oh, we'd love to collaborate. We'd love to get someone in, but then there was no know-how about like how to go about it. And so it was about being like, okay, well, let's like meet some people, let's hang out. Like that's how it's going to happen. And one of the initiatives that I ended up leading was actually with Rendell Adjei, who's a Toronto-based spoken word artist and poet who I met through Rise. And so we had a previous relationship, like professional relationship here in Toronto. And so I reached out to him and I said, would you come to Regina and do a workshop at a school, and I'll connect you with a local poet here. And so we connected him with Brad Belgard, his name is InfoRed online. And they did a collaborative workshop together with the youth. And that like, sorry, I'm looking after a puppy today. So if you see me looking off screen, it's because there's a tiny dog running around. And that was sort of like a great jumping off point where they did a workshop, and then that evening they did like a live performance in the gallery, and it really shifted the energy of the gallery, and like it brought in all these kids who had the workshop earlier in the day and like really enjoyed it, so they wanted to come see them perform, and like it brought in a different audience, and people were like, wait, like can we do this next week? It created this energy and the interest that, you know, we were able to do it the next year. It was a COVID year, so it was all online. So, you know, it didn't have the same energy. But, you know, to answer your question, I think like for me, working within these institutions, it's been a lot about like relationship building in order to counteract some of the density that you encounter, or the sort of like lack of momentum. And I've heard institutions described as like ships in the night, like, you know, these huge ships that it's very hard to steer them or pivot them. It takes a long time and a lot of effort. And so for me, it's been like focusing on the people as a way of sort of trying to mitigate that slowness, or trying to address that slowness within my own sphere.
Dion Brand talks about the institutions. I remember reading early in my career, reading her words about the institutions like this as being, especially Canadian ones specifically, as being icebergs, cold, white, and unmovable. And I was like, what? Yes, okay. And the job of chipping away at that iceberg can be a very lonely and isolating one. And I wonder for you, Lillian, about the allyship or you know Alika was talking about all of those other folks around that become allies, have become people that you can lean on. Do you have that sort of um, support? Do you have that support network in the work that you do, and how important is that, and how does it work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, collaboration has been something that's been so important to me in my development as a curator. In undergrad and university overall, I didn't get a lot of encouragement, like in terms of you should look into this, you'd be good at this. Like, even in high school, like there wasn't a lot of people, opening those doors, as you say, Alika. So there was a sort of moment that I like will hold really dear to my heart for a long time when I was in the second year of my graduate degree, and I had a meeting with John Hampton, who's a curator who's now the director at the Mackenzie, and they were like, they listened to my pitch or my spiel about what I'm working on, and then they said like, what are you thinking for next year? And I was like, I have no idea. I don't know what I'm going to do after I graduate. And they said, something will come up. And then they emailed me a job posting at their organization and said, you might be interested in this. And like, it was the first time that someone sort of like kind of just showed me something, showed me an opportunity. And they've been such an amazing support for me as a collaborator. We've done exhibitions together, but also as a mentor, just someone I can message on Facebook and say, like, this happened. What would you advise, or what would you do in this situation? And that's been an amazing sounding board. And then upon getting this job and moving to Regina, um, I connected with a lot of folks there. There, as I mentioned, it's not a large Black community, but there was a few folks there, including Alyssa Huron, who I have a feeling that she got her inspo from your crew, Alika, because we had Brown Girl Outdoor World, which I think she had messaged you about, that we were going to try this. That was sort of like an opportunity for all of us gals to get together and experience the outdoors in Regina as Black people. So we went skating, we went like, tobogganing, just like anything we could do outside. I think they went cross country skiing. One of the times I couldn't go with them. They've gone camping, and so that crew had also was like, like that, an opportunity just to like be among like peers and colleagues. So kind of within the professional sphere, pardon me, folks like John Hampton or Jazz Morgan have really like advocated for me and supported me and shown that kind of support. And then like the importance of like decompressing and like, getting out of that professional sphere, that crew. And I've got my crew here in Toronto too, but like the Brown Girl Outdoor World crew, it was this opportunity to do that like among people who weren't only like-minded, but who were also sort of like facing the same things at work. So then we could all come together and like, yeah, while we were skating, like also debrief and have like, and kind of support one another through that. So it's something that I highly recommend, because I've gone through so many periods of isolation in my career where I don't have many opportunities to connect whenever I'm speaking to a person who's wanting to follow this career, especially a racialized person. I'm like, call me, you have my email, like, you know, here's my number. If that's not too weird, like I totally want to be accessible to you, because I had never had that, and I want to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore. And it made me think about something that you were talking about, Cameron, too, where like in these weird gaps in universities, where there isn't, you know, there aren't the profs there aren't the kind of like um you know, elders, for lack of a better word, there who are able to kind of steer us and guide us. And it's legacy work that I'm like in my early stage of my career, I'm trying to keep in mind and trying to like um you know, create space for it in the best way that I know how. So yeah, it's not easy out there. The last person I spoke to, I said, keep your elbows out, you know, don't shrink. um but anyway, sorry, I'm getting carried away, so I'll go back to you guys.
I don't mind you getting carried away. I'm loving it. I think one of the takeaways, I love this idea of having a group that goes out and decompresses together, because this work is work. Like, I mean, it is work, and there is added stress, um I think. And I think this is a question that I'm going to ask of all of you around that, because it's not even so much. I saw this quote recently that I would like to have it maybe tattooed all over my body, is um, never stress alone. So always have people in your corner, always have a community, always reach out in that way, that you should not be stressing alone ever. Anyway, that's just an aside, because it just reminded me that, you know, these creating these groups where you can be with each other and talk to each other about these very particular challenges. And I ask you this, this is a rambling preamble to the ramble. Anyway, what I want to talk about is the additional pressure that identity brings to the already stressful jobs that you have. So not only are you expected to be excellent at your job, period, writ large, whatever, but there's also this additional thing of representing a culture, making sure that you make things better for everyone that's coming after. The legacy piece is always, you know, there as well. So I wonder how you are all handling that additional pressure, because I think when people think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and people that work in those spheres, I think they forget that they're actually also people that are working in those spheres. So I wonder how you all are handling it kind of personally, to have that kind of pressure on the work that you're doing. Maybe I'll start with you, Cameron.
Yeah, it's not always easy. And I
Before you
think,
start, sorry.
yeah,
I just want to say questions are open. Like, if you want to drop a question in the Q&A, please do so right now. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Cameron.
no, I think it's not always easy for me. And I think sometimes I have to give myself the grace to go in between what I can offer that day. And so sometimes it's like me actually just being in this play, and the only Black person in this play is all I have to give today. And so that's my offering. And then sometimes, and you know, like Lillian said, I think we just start collecting people. We collect, yeah, I won't even say mentees or mentors, but like we are always in collaboration with people who have more experience, have less experience, and so that we can synchronize and just and share on each other's energy. So sometimes it is mentoring that I'm like, okay, yeah, I have the space to sit with somebody and have coffee and offer my story and be inspired by theirs and take that on. Or I do have the space sometimes to sit on this panel or to sit on a advisory committee and advise on curriculum. But giving myself the grace of like some days I can't do that. And so I'm knowing and identifying that in myself, where I start to feel that like oh, I have to respond to this email and I know I should, but I can't. I'm not feeling like I can. I'm feeling like, okay, I need to let that go and say no and you know, come up with whatever response you feel comfortable sharing. But knowing that that's okay because there's no leaving my blackness at the door, like I said. So in some ways, in many ways, it's just showing up as a political act. Just being there is a statement. And so recognizing that for myself, I think it's how I'm dealing with it. It's ongoing.
Alika?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Cameron said. I definitely had to realize that that the pressure existed. And I think it was pretty pronounced in the capital project because for so long, especially in a pandemic and doing a capital project in a pandemic, like I was the, only person in the building, so to speak. It was like a very individual exercise in that sense, and that you're creating something for community, but they're not yet in it. And so there was a lot of, sense sometimes of like decisions that you're making and problems that you're facing, and this awareness that there's all these people who don't know exactly what you're facing here today, but are gonna come to the finish thing and be like, so why did you do that? How come we didn't do that? How come this doesn't have this? Um, and knowing that created just a lot of, I think, fear for me at times, but I just had to let it go. Like I had to put the moment in context. And I think working from this place of like, oftentimes when you're the first, there's also like, additional,
Yes.
pressure. But acknowledging that like we're not the only, that's the beauty of also this moment that we're in. And like when we started this process, there were far fewer, Black arts organizations going through capital projects, being at, the kind of level that they're at, and now being able to see like, yeah, Band is doing a capital project, Blackhurst is coming to fruition. Like there's more Black art spaces than, the city has probably ever seen. And so, recognizing that, yeah, there's folks doing this work all over also means I don't have to do everything. We don't have to do everything. I think that that recognition, and then to Cameron's point, the grace of like, I'm doing what I can, and I do not let funders stress me out. That's the other thing. I'm under resourced, so if your report's late, babes, it's late. Guess what? Don't want me to do that. So I just put all those kinds of things in context too, because like timelines and deadlines are artificial. So
How about you, Lillian?
Yeah, I mean, echoing my colleagues here. I think a good lesson that I learned that like I wish I had learned sooner was, just a reminder, curating is my job. Just like it's my job, it's not my life.
Right.
And it's not my identity. It's not
Right.
how I am it's not how I'm valuable in the world. And I think I have always ascribed a lot of self-worth to my career and to my next steps and to that progression. And so to have someone say, it's your job, it's like that's it, that's what you've got to give to it. That really helped me sort of create a lot more space, which helps preserve energy, preserve peace, to be able to kind of set it down and walk away and be like, I can have more and I can look elsewhere for pleasure and for affirmation. So I love it. It means a lot to me. I think about it all the time, but trying to create a box to keep that part of my life in.
Yeah. It's there's this thing that scope creep, like when the scope of something just starts to creep into I feel like when we say my job is not my identity, I think there's a scope creep that happens when you're Black, when you're one of few, that like it starts to creep in. And I think that that's the thing that you always have to be kind of aware of, because that can become a dangerous place to be, or very exhausting place to be. A couple questions that I see here. any recommendations? This is for you, I think, Cameron. Any recommendations for graduates who are looking to transition into working in theater?
I mean, I would say if you're looking to transition, sort of assuming that maybe you haven't been studying or working in that space, um, gaining experience and training always first. And that doesn't necessarily need to be through a formalized institution, but it does mean, are you, if you're going to be looking at this as a career, as any career, do you have the skills? Do you have the tools? Do you have an understanding of what it means to walk into an audition and show up and say, I can do this job, I can do this part? And so much of being an actor is and working in theater is managing rejection and showing up and investigating in what it is to be an artist and what's bringing you into theater. Um, I always tell young people, if you want to just do plays and act, join community theater, because there's amazing community theater out there, and like it doesn't need to be your career. You don't need to be uh, fulfill your artistic passions by making it your career. If you want to make it your career, there's something else that needs to be there. It can't just be about being on stage. It can't just be about making the art, because sometimes you're not going to have the opportunity to make it, or you'll be making it and you'll be not paid for it, or you'll be working on projects that are ongoing, or somebody, you're about to start a project and then it's canceled because of COVID, and so like Lillian said, our jobs are not our identities. So really sort of think about what it is that's calling you to this. And I think people are called to careers as artists. What's calling you to that? And if it feels strong, then do it. If it feels like I kind of just want to do it, go find another job that you're okay with, and then do as much community theater on the side, or community building on the side. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But if you feel called to it as a career, find that deep passion and articulate it for yourself, because kind of choosing a life of a bit of a difficulty, and that's cool, but it's the reality.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions, but there's one that came in from Sydney. I can see how much value there is when helping each other get where they want to be, and how leaders need to incorporate this practice in their work. Do you have advice for students who are interested in mentoring younger people, and how to become a good mentor, how to pay it forward? Who wants to start?
I can go.
Yes, please.
I mean, I think even just the intention of wanting to support others is so commendable. Not everyone has that inclination or desire. And I think, what's great to remember about mentorship is it is like an offering, right? And so you want people to, it's not about telling people what to do as much as it is helping people to understand their own journey and, what they're looking for, and kind of being able to sort of point them in directions to resources or supports. And I think that the reminder that, you're also going to probably learn a lot from if someone's, much younger than you or in a different generation, and keeping yourself sort of open to that exchange can be a really helpful, I guess, framing when you're thinking about giving back. But I mean, being willing and present to support someone else in their journey is just a tremendous, I think, perspective to have. So keep going. Don't shy away from doing it. Don't feel like you need to get it perfect as well. You're going to learn through the process.
Lillian?
If I can add, I'd also say, like, talk amongst your friends, like talk to your peers. Make sure those communication channels are open. I think like a lot of learning and advocacy can happen there too. Like, like talk about what you're being offered for payment and compensation, or like, draft an email and have a friend look at it. Like, I think those have been like really valuable like relationships for me, just having friends who you can ask those sorts of things and talk about that stuff with. And I think it helps with isolation, and also just, working in maybe organizations that are mostly white too, just sort of like breaking down the perceived hierarchy there, and breaking that silence.
How about you, Cameron?
Yeah. I just add also being clear about your own boundaries and your own capacity, and um, building on what Lillian said, as you become aware of your own network, sometimes it's like, actually, I think you should meet this person, and
Yes.
they like talk to them and connect somebody, and then that might be a better match for mentorship as well. And so, not sort of just if you are going to enter that mentorship space, knowing that it's not it's personal, but it's not always personal, and so allow it
Mhm.
to um, allow there to be space to pass somebody on or to connect somebody else, and know when you're in that boundary of like, oh, actually, I can't do this right now, and that way you're not creating expectations that aren't met.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love these answers. I'm just going to throw my own answer in there real quick, and that kind of jumps on what Cameron was saying. Our group and what Lillian was saying, what all of you have been saying. Our group, Media Girlfriends, the company started out as Media Girlfriends, the kind of networking sort of, and it has maintained as a place for women in media to network specifically, and a lot of women who are racialized have met within that. But what we have done, one of the most important thing is that someone that loves using Excel spreadsheets added every single person's name and what capacity they were at, like what they would be great at. So say a Black History Month opportunity comes in, you can say to someone, I'm sorry, Nestle or whoever, I cannot speak because I'm at capacity. Here's someone, here's 5 different names that you can have. And you just look on the Excel sheet and you pass them along. And it's worked really well for mentorship as well. I'm at capacity, but I know that Namageni or, Hannah Sung or Nanaba Duncan, one of them has time for you. Here's 5 names. I hate Excel spreadsheets, but there is someone in your friend group that loves them. There always is. There's always that weirdo that loves Excel. I don't know who they are in your group, but find that person and create something. We are going to, I think we need to wrap up the session, unfortunately. But I do want to give each of you just like a minute to give a little bit of advice to someone who is starting out in the creative arts, and they're Black, they're trying to navigate being a leader in that space. What is one bit of advice that you can throw out to an individual like that? Who wants to start, or do I have to point at somebody? I'm looking at you, Cameron.
I know it feels basic, but just believe in yourself. You've come through this program, you've come through your formal training, and now it's time to like actually just trust that you have a foundation. Know that it's not going to go maybe the way that you planned, and that's okay. And there will be opportunities that pull you in directions that you never thought you could imagine. But believe in yourself, because other people will see opportunities in you that
Mm-hmm.
you might not have seen for yourself. And if you can at least get out of your own way, then you can follow those roads, or you can see that posting and say, yeah, actually, I could try to do that. I could see myself doing that, or I could work to that, or I could find the connection to how I could get that job. Or so I think if you start there with believing that you have it, you're ready, then the world's your oyster in some ways. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Lillian, piece of advice.
I would say we want to hear from you. Your ideas are important, and don't be afraid to send that email. Send it. Send it. Click send.
Yes. Yes. Put yourself out there. Alika.
I had a similar one, but I guess I would say get started. It can be a small step. It can be, writing a reflection. It could be creating a mood board. It could be, just articulating a vision for where you want to be in the next 5 years. But sometimes when your dreams are really big or you see other people doing amazing things, you're like, oh, it's going to take so long. It's going to be difficult. I don't have the kind of support, I don't have the right education, maybe I took the wrong program and I'm in science, I love art. Like, don't worry about any of that. Just worry about listening to your own voice and articulating your own vision, and take that smallest step today of like opening a folder, creating a drive, dedicating yourself to your practice and your work and your ideas. And, set a time this week that you're going to focus on that, and just take those small steps. And that consistency of doing that every week is going to get you that much closer to your dreams. So
Yes.
start and be consistent.
Beautiful. Can I add, just find your people? I'll add that to it. Find your people. They will always lift you up when you feel like you're not quite there. As Lillian said, they will look over that email. They will help you to figure out how to ask for the money, ask for what you're worth. Your people will cheer you towards, asking for that extra whatever that is really needed, and knowing your own worth. It's hard to see it yourself, but when you have your people, they generally can do that for you. I want to thank all three of you so, so deeply for being so generous with your time and with your answers and with your thoughts. You really brought it today, and I feel quite honored to have spoken to Lillian and to Cameron and to Alika. Good luck in all of your pursuits. You're doing some incredible work, and we'll see you out there as we support everything that y'all are doing. That's our role now. We take it on now to support y'all in your excellent work. I'm going to hand it on over to Sydney to wrap up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, everybody. Garvia, Lillian, Cameron, Alika, this was a very impactful session. I've also taken notes, and I've also thought a lot about mentorship and how that's helped me get where I'm at and my journey through university. So I really do believe that this conversation is helping a lot of our students, and we will definitely be sharing the recording as well afterwards. So lastly, just thanking everyone here that stayed throughout the whole call. Thank you so much. And I hope that everybody does have something that they have gotten out of this session today. So wishing everyone a good rest of your day. I'm feeling pretty good, and I hope our panelists and our moderator also enjoyed today. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone.